In Philip Yancey's book, What's So Amazing About Grace, he tells the story about receiving a postcard that simply had these 6 words on it. I am the one Jesus loves. Well, when he realized who had sent him that postcard, at first he thought maybe it was a friend trying a one-upmanship on him, saying, well, Jesus loves me more than he loves you. But as he talked with his friend, he realized that wasn't what the postcard was all about. Actually, the friend had sent the postcard based upon a thought that had been planted him by the author Brennan Manning. And Manning was referring to Jesus' closest friend. You may remember the disciple John, who Jesus said of him, I am the one, or that John identifies himself in the gospel as, I am the one Jesus loves. Now, as you think about that, if you were to ask John who he was, he wouldn't have said, I'm a disciple, I'm an apostle, I'm an evangelist, I'm one who wrote one of the gospels. But rather he would identify himself as, I am the one Jesus loves. What would it mean for you and I to come to the place in our daily lives that we lived our lives like we truly believed, I am the one that Jesus loved? How would that impact the way we live our daily lives, the way we interact with others, if we constantly were aware, I am the one that Jesus loves? What would it mean at the close of our day? How would we look back at the close of our day if we had lived that day recognizing, I am the one that Jesus loves? Sociologists have a theory called the looking glass theory, that you become what the most important person in your life, your husband, wife, mother, father, your boss, you become what the most important person in your life believes you to be. How would my life change if I truly believed the Bible's astounding words that Jesus loves me? Manning tells the story of an Irish priest who was out for a walk in his parish, and there was a peasant who was kneeling by the side of the road and was praying. And so Manning the priest turned to him and said, you must be very close to God. And the peasant looked up and hesitated, and he said, yes, he's very fond of me. That's the image of grace that I want you to think about in these coming weeks. First of all, God is very fond of you. And you are the one that Jesus loves. As we begin this series talking about grace, I want us to first consider the question of what is the difference between mercy and grace. Mercy is when you are not given what you deserve. I remember in college, it was a chemistry class, and we had a test, and over 80% of the class got less than 60% right on the test. Now, normally 60% was considered failing, but because over 80% of the class got under 60% of the questions right, the professor graded us on a curve, and it ended up that you could have as low as 25% on the exam and still have a passing grade. The professor didn't give us what we deserved, because if he had given us what we deserved, 80% of the class would have failed. But he showed us mercy. Grace, on the other hand, means that you are given unmerited favor. That means that you are given a gift that you have done nothing to deserve. It is by grace that I was born to a family living in the United States. I could have been born into a refugee family in Darfur in the western Sudan of Africa. I could have been born into a family that lived in poverty in Haiti. But it is by grace that I was born into a family that lived in the United States. And that grace is unmerited favor. I did nothing to deserve that or bring it about. Well, let's think about grace and mercy in theological terms. The biblical term mercy means that we do not receive the punishment that we deserve. We do not receive the punishment for the sin that we deserve, but because of God's forgiveness, we experience mercy and we are not given what we deserve. The biblical concept of grace is one which refers to the unmerited favor of God. God gives us a gift that we do not deserve. He gives us the gift of salvation, a gift that He offers to us that we must receive. In Ephesians chapter 2, Paul says, "For it is by grace that you have been saved through faith, and this is not from yourselves, but it is a gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast." If salvation is something that I deserve, then it's something that I can boast about because I've earned it. I deserve this gift of salvation. But Paul says that salvation is not something that we can earn. We only receive it by God's grace. It's something that God offers to us, and it's ours for the receiving. We often see ourselves as being independent. We hear about being the self-made man or the self-made woman. We hear about pulling ourselves up by our own bootstraps. Because we encourage such an independent mentality in our culture, it's much easier for us to help someone else than it is for us to receive something ourselves. It's much easier for us to bring food to give to the food pantry than it would be for us if we had a need to go to the food pantry and ask for assistance. There are many people sitting in the pews every Sunday morning who are not here because they recognize their need for God, but they come out of a sense of duty, or that's what they always do on Sunday. They're handling life pretty well on their own, and so coming to church is more of something they do rather than something that they really see that they need. Now, churches in Africa and Haiti are filled to overflowing every Sunday because as the people come, they recognize that they need the hope that only Christ can give. They don't know what else to do, and as they come to church, they are looking for hope. They are looking for something in their lives. So often we come, we've got life by the tail. Everything is just fine, and so as we come in, we don't recognize that same sense of expectancy of God, I need to meet you in this day. Chuck Colson has said that because we are so wealthy and so independent in our country, we live as though we really do not need God. As I think about such things, some questions come to mind. If a person lives as if they do not need God, does that mean that God doesn't work in their life in any way? Is God's grace at work in the life of a person who doesn't know Christ? If God doesn't work in their life, then how are they ever drawn into a saving knowledge of Jesus? How are they ever drawn into a saving faith? During the next few weeks, we're going to be talking about the topic of grace. We're going to be talking about some of the different aspects of grace. Next week, we're going to be talking about saving grace. We're also going to be talking about sanctifying grace. We're going to be talking about how is it that we experience God's grace in our life. What are obstacles? What are things that keep us from experiencing God's grace? But this morning, as we begin, I want to talk about a topic of grace called prevenient grace. A grace that goes before.